Hey everyone, it's Friday, it's 11-ish. This is the Flow State Podcast. I'm Stuart P. Turner, and today we're going to flip the script a bit and talk about sales because, you know, we're all doing it in one way or another, and it was a great event last night, Seismic Sips, so Seismic kindly, chucked a few drinks and some food on. Interesting panel discussion, co-organised by Pavilion. And look, there was some really interesting insights, takeaways. You know, it's great just to get together and chat with people in sales who tend to be pretty fun and outgoing. And just kind of validated a lot of stuff that, you know, we've been talking about more from the other side of the spectrum, the marketing side through the year. A lot of the conversation and sort of challenges resonated with me personally, as I'm obviously, you know, here selling myself and my businesses. So it's nice to know you're not alone. So look, I thought I'd run through my takeaways from that. There was some really interesting stuff thinking about next year and the challenges at the end of the year. Apologies just before I begin as well. If you were here last week desperately wondering what was happening, there was no podcast last week because my son managed to break his big toe just walking around the house. Don't know how he managed that, but that somewhat threw the week into chaos. So the podcast was not a priority. So sorry, not that sorry. More important stuff going on. So with that in mind, thanks again, Seismic, for the drinks and the food. Well, thanks mainly to the Rook in Sydney. Food amazing. Go there and eat the delicious fried chicken burger with this like magic curry sauce. Amazing. Had some good veggie options as well. But it wasn't just all about the food, but the food was definitely a highlight. So look, what did we talk about? Well, there was a really interesting panel. I'll kind of tag everyone, and I'm going to write a post about this as well. And just kind of, obviously, if you want to sort of follow any of the people that were there, there's some interesting speakers and opinions going on. It was largely a group of people as part of the Revenue Enablement Society as well. So it's obviously a lot of people in sales or business development roles, all kind of, you know, focused on driving revenue. A lot of people who are directly responsible for the activities that drive revenue. And the funniest thing I found, I'm going old school today as well. I've got a notebook, I've got my pen, just mixing it up for the end of the year. So a few things that I found resonated. Personally, I found it's been a challenging year on the sales front. And I don't know if, if you're listening and you've ever done a sales job. So I've never sold other people's stuff. I've only ever sold, I have sold other people's stuff. I've sold, but it's always been me doing a part of it. So in my agency days, when we were doing B2C, I was largely focused on growth and retention when I was employed by other people. So, you know, account management, account direction, delivering consultative services. And I would never have characterized that as a sales job at the time, but obviously it is because, you know, I'm either selling like my specialism, we're selling the team, our services, the output. But look, I never really looked at it that way because we were naturally doing the whole consultative sale. You know, we do stuff, it clearly drives value. Like that to me is like a pretty easy thing to do because it was stuff that I was doing. So you just talk about that in a way that you get excited about, and people get excited as well. And then if you do it well, it's pretty straightforward. So that was kind of my, you know, where I started, like mainly growth and retention. Then when I moved into, I set up my own contracting freelance business before I left the UK. So that was just selling SEO and analytics. And that was my first taste when it's probably in like mid to late 20s when I was doing that, of just how hard it is to actually develop new business and sell to new people. Because while the digital industry at the time was all on the up and up, you know, people just they don't want to know. Everyone's busy. They're all doing their own thing. You're just another, you know, door knocker or, you know, virtual door knocker trying to grab their attention for some reason. So yeah, it's pretty hard work. I was under the illusion that a lot of people probably are, that I'm like, you know, I'm a likable guy. I'm good at my job. Obviously people are going to want to work with me. They'll just know that that's the case. And you're like, mate, they don't. And they don't care until you make them care. So yeah, that was a bit of an eye opener. And then obviously fast forwarding to now, you know, I'm sort of, you know, Flow State is not necessarily structured around working with hundreds of clients. Like it's, do big work for a small number of clients type business, but I still obviously have to find those clients. Just because it's a small number doesn't mean that they're just magically coming out of nowhere. So that in and of itself is a challenge because we sit in an interesting space where, you know, we're a growth business. We're sort of we draw together sales and marketing, which is where we build our solutions. But depending on who you talk to, that can mean different things, and the way that we deploy them can be very different. So it's it's a consultative sort of long sell. And then obviously I've built a SaaS business. We're building another one at the moment. And I personally find those a lot more straightforward because products either do or don't do things. But the exciting part is like, what can you do with them? And that's where bringing in a consultative hat again, like, anyone can pick up a new software, right? But just like anyone could pick up a guitar, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to play it well. You can make some noise, but you can't necessarily play a song. So I feel that that's if we like a musical analogy, that's the difference. So yeah, getting back around to the takeaways from last night, why I found this interesting was there's a lot of chat of like this year deal slippage was a big topic of conversation and how there has been a lot of it. And obviously we're approaching the end of the year, and that for us here in Australia is a sort of time that I both love and hate, because the reason that I'm still down here and now an Australian as well as a British guy is the work-life balance down here is amazing. So, December, January, summer holidays, everyone's going away, weather's amazing. You just kind of, everyone's sort of winding down a bit, and it's nice just to not have the mad, hectic, almost frenzy of what used to go on in the UK around Christmas, where everyone's just like mad for like a bit of time off and desperate to just have a bit of a break. And you've got the looming, nightmare of the long winter coming in January. So it's so different here, which is cool, love it. But the challenge is, as someone who works fast and is generally fairly impatient and always like, looking a step or two ahead, which is my own personal challenge, it's a difficult time to generate momentum and traction, I would say. So I wasn't hugely surprised to hear that, deal stuff is slipping. However, it was interesting to hear that it's been kind of happening all year, like from the start. And I would put that down to just, the macro issues, right? Like we've got cost of living going on here. We've got, geopolitical disruption. There's rumblings of economic upset. There's tariffs. Like, there's been a huge amount of firings across certain industries like that. Just, it lends itself to being cautious, right? Which you can understand, but obviously it's a challenge if you're trying to sell stuff. And there was, there's a lot of interesting chat last night about how people are addressing that and, the ways that they're trying to sort of get things moving, which I found very reassuring. So that was good. That was takeaway number one. Number two, which is probably a common theme. So if you've listened to this show throughout this year, and also the first and second series, AI has been a hot topic. AI is we're getting used to AI now, and I think it was one of the seismic guys who was saying the frothing is sort of dying down about it now, which I enjoyed. But we're all, I feel, realizing that AI has now been shoved into everything, and Google are a great example of this, where like they've just pushed Gemini down everyone's throats. My Google Workspace now costs me more because they've forced Gemini on me. I don't necessarily want it or even use it for all the stuff that they think I will. Like, Clippy 2.0. Hey, did you know you can analyze this spreadsheet? And I'm like, yeah, what the fuck do you think I'm doing? Like in the spreadsheet in the first place. But anyway, so that's all been shoved in. But the actual practical day-to-day application is, I have found, relatively narrow, and it's just, become a bit of background noise everywhere, where like I just have to close a load of windows now to be like, did you want to AI this? Did you want to analyze this? And I'm like, no, I don't. I just want to use the platform that I'm paying for. So that, it felt like, it's getting in the way. There's a lot of great efficiency gains, but the efficiency has somewhat come at the sacrifice of efficiency in other areas, or it's also made lazy people lazy in different ways, which was a great comment that came out of last night. So just it's everywhere in it now. We're dealing with it. The other thing that was fun was there was a lot of discussion about the sales marketing gap, which is a favorite topic of mine, going back even to my previous company days 5 or 6 years ago. So if you are not familiar with the concept of the sales marketing gap, if you are, you're probably experiencing it directly day to day. But for those who might not know what it is, the sales marketing gap emerges when an organization gets to a certain size and complexity, and there is a certain size of sales and marketing resource within that organization. And the two tend to drift apart. And in sort of traditional-ish terms, where the issue is marketing in B2B, typically is looking at a lot of top of the funnel stuff, right? So they are doing great brand awareness stuff, messaging, product stuff's getting out there, organizing events, all very important stuff. They'll be like, look, we're generating loads of great MQLs from this, right? Marketing qualified leads. Sales at the bottom end of the funnel obviously are very focused on one-to-one and buyer group relationships, generating deals, generating traction, like signing deals and actually generating revenue. They tend to generate all their own SQLs or sales qualified leads. And the challenge emerges because the gap between the two and the definition of those two things is often worlds apart. And a lot of the marketing leads will drop into a bottomless pit in the middle of the funnel that from whence they will never emerge. And the SQLs all come from somewhere else because the sales team are finding them all. And there's a variety of different challenges and ways that this emerges. But the short version, which came out of last night, which is the recurring theme, is marketing don't really know what sales are doing and have limited interest because they're all kind of marking their own homework and typically, just are under a lot of pressure to get a lot done under constantly shrinking budgets. So look, no judgment whatsoever here. I've seen both sides of this. Whereas sales obviously just typically have no idea what marketing are doing or see it as completely irrelevant to what they're doing. And as noted, the leads that sales are getting don't often come from marketing, or they'll take marketing leads and they'll just sit in the pipeline because they're just deemed to be unqualified or not qualified enough. And that challenge, though it amazes me, is still here today. And that's partly why I have a job now and my business exists. So as I was saying earlier, that's where Flow State slots in. Because I've done both extensively, and a direct experience of both these things, and I get I'm not a marketing guy or a sales guy, I'm actually a digital guy that understands both. That allows us to sit in quite a unique position where we can bridge the two and help them work together more effectively. So I was talking to a lot of people about that last night and how that was working in their orgs, and obviously can't name names or talk out of school, but there was a lot of fun stuff there that all was very familiar to me. So it was nice just to to share a bit of that. So that was takeaway number, what are we on, 3. Number 4, which I found particularly interesting based on what I'm doing now, is that a business case is no longer enough. So one of the direct challenges that we're working on and that we solve with Flow State and we'll solve with our new technology next year is a lot of sales is driven by a focus on one or two key decision makers, right? Because traditionally that's the way it's worked in less complex times, going back probably a fair way. And depending on your industry and the complexity of the things that you're selling, you will be selling to a buyer group, right? So buyer groups are who you are selling to. You might not know them all. You might not even talk to them all the way through the process, but they're there. And the challenge that people are finding now more directly, and this came out of last night as well, is that you might present a great business case for your product or service or whatever, and your key decision maker is like, yeah, brilliant, we'll get it over the line. But then someone else is going to turn around, one of their stakeholders who's in the buyer group, and suddenly be like, oh, well, you've got to pitch this to our team and come in. And if, some randos that you've never met who've been involved in this process that you weren't aware of behind the scenes suddenly have the power to veto your deal, and it could just be killed out of hand because, you haven't had a chance to prep around those people. You don't know what they're after. You don't know what their agenda is, and you just get thrown in at the deep end, and that just can destroy something. So that's part of what we address directly, is learning about your buyer group, generating actual full buyer group intelligence, so that you don't get blindsided by these things. But look, it's challenging because not everyone's going to let you into that degree either. So there's a lot of sort of forensic sales work that you need to be doing at the sort of the development stage to build up to that. So that was interesting because I've found, obviously I have a lot of conversations about this. This is what we're doing across our engagements, and where this becomes super interesting, it's just, sort of, as everyone was talking about, you're selling in the value, going back to consultative sales. You're not just selling a product, you're not just selling a time saving on its own or, an upside or whatever. You've got to build the longer range value to show people that you can be trusted and you're a safe pair of hands. And building that consensus across a group of people that you don't necessarily meet or know is hard work, right? So that's, that's interesting, I found. And the other related point that came out of this, which was 4A, if you like, is, look, everyone's cautious at the moment. So going back to what I was saying about, deal slippage and nervousness around signing stuff off, there's a lot of uncertainty and people want a safe pair of hands. They want to know that they're bringing a trusted partner in. And again, you've got to work to build that up. So a lot of comments last night as well about how the prep work is taking a lot longer, which resonated with me, because I think just building trust doesn't happen overnight, right? You can't just suddenly meet someone and, be like, oh yeah, great, let's get married right now. Building that trusted relationship is a time consuming process that can only be sped up so much. So that was an interesting one. And look, number 5, the final one, which I found quite amusing given what we've all been talking about on the AI front, is now that people are a bit more savvy about AI and the risks around it. A few people mentioned that, some big deals had just been killed because AI had got parachuted in at like the 11th hour, and it just scared off like the prospects they were talking to, because everybody now, or maybe not everybody, but most people who've been directly involved in AI and are now thinking more about the privacy issues, the governance problems, regulation, how they're protecting their teams and their staff, how are you protecting your data, how are you protecting your business IP. These are all very valid and very serious concerns. So if you're a vendor, particularly a product business, for example, it's less of an issue for services because we're pretty agnostic. We don't care what we use. But yeah, if you're a product business and you're like, there's a lot of chat about HubSpot's latest updates and all the AI stuff they've been banging on about. And you're like, yeah, great, you've dropped AI into your platform, but what are you doing with my data? So like for CRM, that's particularly concerning because you're obviously putting a lot of very high value first party business critical information in there. So people are quite rightly a bit concerned about what HubSpot, for example, are going to be doing with that data and how they're using it, and whether that really is in my best interests as a customer or is it in their best interests as a business. And this all ladders back up to the bigger topics that we've been discussing around the sort of the structure and nature of software in particular, because that whole, Silicon Valley driven growth at all costs, which we talked about earlier in the series, like approach, is what's causing a divergence of agendas, I think, because, investors in businesses want to see returns. And if they're pushing businesses just to grow, the growth of that business does not directly align necessarily with what made them great as a company in the first place. And I'm sure you've seen countless examples of this yourself. I've seen loads where you sign up to a piece of software, it's amazing for a couple of years. You're like, wow, these guys really love their customers. Suddenly they get funded and, the agenda changes and it's just like features, crap everywhere. And I know I've probably unfairly just ranted about Canva a lot, but they're a perfect example to me of, I've never really liked it. I know why people like it, but I don't like it. But over the course of their continued growth, all they've done is just like ramming stuff in left, right, and center, cover as many use cases as possible. And look, that makes sense from a growth point of view, because it's how they make money, right? But to me, when I log in there now, it's just like a mess of stuff they're trying to sell you, random crap, like the UI is horrible, like it just doesn't gel with me at all. So I just think, that's one amongst, hundreds of tools that, not to unfairly pick on Canva, that I've had that experience with. So, look, I think, but coming back to what I was saying, if you're selling software, like that's in the back of everyone's minds as well. Like you can't discount that experience that everyone's sort of referring to. And I wanted to round off this little rundown with the reassuring / possibly horrifying fact that everyone, I think, agreed last night that you just, no matter the systems and the science and the processes you have around your sales and growth process, you cannot account for the, mad wildcard element of just human sort of behavior in these processes. And as I was saying at the start, no podcast last week because we had a medical emergency, right? Like you can't account for that stuff. You can't account for people's possibly background concern that you might steal all their data. Maybe there's some sort of mad cooker who lives out in the countryside. They're a sovereign citizen. You don't know. So that's where buyer group intelligence obviously becomes very important, and just spending more time on the groundwork. So look, that was it. It was a really useful evening. Great to see a few familiar faces and meet a load of new people from across the the sort of sales and growth community around Sydney. So thanks everyone who was there. It was awesome. And yeah, look, I guess like good luck to everyone who's trying to close stuff before the end of the year. We're in the same boat. We're trying to get stuff lined up for 2026. The wheel never stops turning when you're in a sales role. So great to see everyone in such high spirits. And look, if you found this useful, I'm keen to, sort of look at plans for next year and where we're going to go with the podcast. So hit me up if you want to jump on. And I hope you have a wonderful target smashing end to the year. I will be back for the next couple of weeks, and then we're probably going to wrap at the start of December on this series. So, get it in your ears while it's still available. See you next time.